morning, everyone. You guys are the real diehards to be up here at this hour, and you're going to have a super nerdy talk this morning because today we're going to talk about the gender ideology and its relationship to the clergy sexual abuse scandal. So we got some deep stuff to deal with, and we will not cover it all. I promise you, we will not cover it all, but we will get you started on the right foot. May I ask, how many of you heard me last summer when I spoke at the conference at the Midwestern Catholic Family Conference? So several of you heard me over there, all right? So when I prepared these slides, I began with that talk as my basis. And what I'm going to do today is do some of what I did last year, but I've got a bunch of brand new stuff added in. So what I'm going to do is when you receive these slides from me, there are going to be a bunch of about 15 slides that I'm not going to talk about. But you can go back to last year's talk that is recorded at the Ruth Institute podcast page, and you can fill in those blanks if you want to learn what those slides are all about and so on and so forth, because I talk about them at length. But we got a lot of good stuff to talk about here, and so I want it to all be available to you, but in one form or another. So some of you asked me where I'm from. I actually am from Louisiana. I live in Louisiana now. I'm actually a Buckeye. I went to Ohio State. I hope you don't hold that against me. Is that okay? Okay, good. Glad to hear that. At least we're not in Michigan. Okay. So I came in yesterday from Lake Charles, Louisiana. And as you can see, Louisiana is not really a very big place in the grand scheme of things. However, back in the day, if you Google Louisiana 1750, here is what you will find. Okay? That is Louisiana. Okay, so I mean, I'm just saying, so you all can be honorary Cajuns and come visit us in Lake Charles whenever you want, and we'll make you feel right at home because after all, we really are from Louisiana. So what we're going to, here's the basic outline of what we're going to do. But before I dig in, I want to say something to you guys about this problem of clergy sexual abuse. You probably know people who are leaving the church over this, or threatening to leave the church, or have left the church. And I would like to say, I know all of us are in agony over it. Right? It's awful for all of us. My position is this, and I commend this to you. In my opinion, I do not have the right to walk away from the church. When I was a little girl, the deposit of faith was given to me intact. And I have a responsibility to pass that on to the next generation to the best of my ability. That is my position. We have no right to turn our backs on our heritage. Thank you. Now, so here is a scary thought, a sobering thought, but it is actually, in a way, liberating. And that is, you've probably already figured out, we have no control over the bishops. We can sit here all day long and say Pope Francis should do X, Y, or Z, and this bishop should do that or that. And at the end of the day, we can't make them do anything. We can't control them. So therefore, we need to focus on what we can control over what we can do something about. Now, we've probably often heard, do good and avoid evil, right? That's the basic moral law. We're supposed to avoid evil and do good. Actually, those two things are not parallel. They sound parallel, but they're not really parallel, because you can always avoid evil. Every single person can go through their entire life without killing anybody. You know what I mean? I mean, you can always avoid every serious evil, but you cannot possibly do every possible good. You can't. It's not, it's just not humanly possible. So therefore, each of us has to discern what is our unique calling from God. Because I believe that's what we're going to be held accountable for on Judgment Day. Did you do the job I gave you to do? Right? Given your unique set of talents that I gave you, given the position, the situation that I put you in, did you do what I needed you to do? I would be a terrible family court judge. But Judge Brooks, that's his vocation, that's what he did, that's what he's supposed to do. If I tried to do that, it'd be a mess, right? So therefore, each of us, what I hope that you will get out of this, and probably a lot of you are already well along the way of thinking like this, but I want you to think in terms not of what are we going to talk Father into doing, but what am I going to do that God wants me to do? And part of the reason this is so important is that we are so far behind We are like 50 or 100 years behind the evil one and his advance of the sexual revolution. We do not have time to be sitting around spinning our wheels, wringing our hands over things we have no control over. So when that thought comes to your mind, when you start getting mad, I want you to take that thought. This is call to action. I didn't label it a call to action. It's a mental call to action. Okay, whenever that thought comes into your mind, stop, interrupt yourself and say, what can I do with this feeling in this moment that will be constructive? Because blaming people or yelling at people or whatever is not going to get us anywhere. See what I mean? All right. And then you're going to become a leader if you do that, right? If you're sitting around whining, I'm sorry, that's just not going to help. And nobody should follow you if you're sitting around whining. You know what I mean? Okay, so call to action. Number 1, today's call to action. I want you to think about your friends who are leaving the church over clergy sexual abuse. And I want you to practice saying this to them. Mentally practice this, or practice it out loud. Say to your friend, your neighbor, your brother, your son, your sister, you are exactly the kind of person we need to stay in the church. You know something is wrong, you have convictions, you want to do something about it. We cannot leave the church to the people who are soiling the bride of Christ. We need you. We need you to stay and help clean house. So practice that in front of the mirror. I talk to myself, it drives my husband crazy. That's how I practice all my speeches. But now I've discovered that if you have an iPhone and earbuds, you can walk around and talk to yourself constantly, and everybody will think you're on a phone call. See, so you can practice, right? You're really not, but they won't know you're just an average, you're not like everybody else out there. So you practice this until you can say it smoothly and from the heart and mean it and have all your fear erased from it and all your anger erased from it. You know what I mean? Because if you blast people with your anger, you're not going to attract them. So you want to practice these things until it's smooth in that way. See what I mean? All right. So you guys are going to be the army. You, here, those of you who are dedicated enough to be here. What do we got? The number of people in this room are quite capable of getting something serious done if you focus. All right, so here's the outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what is the gender ideology, kind of briefly, how does it fit into the overall picture of the sexual revolution. Then I'm going to answer some contested questions. The main one being, are people really born gay? There's actually a lot of information on this question of whether people are born gay, and it's a very important, pivotal question that you need to be comfortable answering, because we've all been kind of bullied into silence about this, okay? And then finally, I want to talk about the gender ideology and the clergy sexual abuse crisis and cover-up within the Catholic Church. So those are the 3 things we're going to talk about. Now, at the very beginning, I want to mention these 2 articles that are must-read articles. If you have any concern about this issue at all, if you have any discernment that you want to be informed about this, these are 2 things that you have to read in order to understand homosexuality and transgenderism. The first one over here is an article from the Federalist that was written in 2018. And it's called, Who Are the Rich White Men Who Are Institutionalizing the Transgender Ideology? This is in the Federalist, not a Catholic publication, okay, by a woman who is not, as far as I know, a religious person at all, but a feminist who's really fed up with the transgender business. And what she finds, who are these rich white men institutionalizing transgenderism? Pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies. If you are going to live a lifetime as the opposite gender, you are going to need a lifetime of artificial hormones and probably other medications in order to pull that off. She goes through chapter and verse of the clinics, the children's gender clinics that have been founded across this country and who paid for them. It's very dark, very creepy, okay? The other article is in a publication called The New Atlantis, and it's a special report on sexuality and gender, put together by 2 distinguished people, Lawrence Mayer and Paul McHugh, Dr. Paul McHugh. This is a very important document and will answer a lot of your questions. So those 2 things, if you have those 2 things in your back pocket, you will be well informed, so if you want to have that. So what is the gender ideology, our first topic? So let me just briefly review the sexual revolution, what I said last night. So you put this into your mind, that a good and decent society should separate sex from babies, That's the contraceptive ideology. The good and decent society should separate both sex and babies from marriage. That's the divorce ideology. And finally, all differences between men and women are suspect at best and unjust almost certainly, and so we should try to wipe them out unless they have been explicitly chosen by the individuals, and that is what we could call the gender ideology. Now, as I somewhat jokingly said last night, the gender ideology back in the day, when it was just feminism, the basic idea was that men and women are identical, except that women are better, okay? And that caused a lot of damage. I talked to a woman last night who, she and I were kind of commiserating the fact of how long it took us to accept that being a mother was a legitimate vocation and a worthy aspiration for a woman. How many years we suffered wanting that, but being unable to articulate that we wanted that. And to say how good it feels to feed people, how good it feels to nurture people, what joy there is in arranging flowers. You know, and all of these stereotypical women things that we felt we weren't allowed to do because we're supposed to be professional tough guys or something. Anyway, but that was then, this is now. Part of what this did was it banned things like father-daughter dances. Okay, there are places where father-daughter dances are literally not permitted because it's considered inappropriate gender stereotyping, okay? Whether it's a legal imposition or whether the school board decides that this is the right thing to do. At this point in our history, it kind of almost doesn't even matter anymore because that kind of thinking is so pervasive, you know, that it should be a parent-child dance and not a father-daughter dance. There's nothing special about the relationship between a father and a daughter. We're not even allowed to say that. Well, now it's morphed into the idea that we require, that gender justice requires gender-neutral bathrooms, that one's identity is something completely chosen, that the idea of justice includes that people can choose their identity. So the new gender ideology, as I mentioned last night, we wipe out all the differences between men and women except the ones that the individuals explicitly choose to bear, as we mentioned last night. And I'm still not dressed like Bruce Jenner is dressed in this photo that it's in everybody's face. So what I want to call your attention to is the contradictory visions that we have going before us. So back in the day, Title IX of the Civil Rights Act was used to mandate equality in athletics, in college and high school athletics between boys and girls. I don't know how many of you remember this happening, okay? But the federal government said Title IX of the Civil Rights Act requires that we have an equal number of sports for girls and boys and an equal number of participants of boys and girls in college sports and in high school sports. Now, of course, they're not going to go to Ohio State and shut down the football program. That's not what they did. They went and shut down men's wrestling programs, swimming programs. They turned things into sports for girls. They made dance into a sport so they could count that towards their quota. Okay? The fact that boys need sports in a way that girls don't, the fact that more boys are interested in sports than girls are, none of that mattered to the federal regulators. Right? None of that mattered. And so they were going around barging into schools and colleges, disrupting long-standing programs that were serving boys and girls both in ways that they wanted to be served. Now, that very same Title IX of the Civil Rights Act is being, or was being used, I don't know exactly its status today, but this was the legal authority that the Obama administration used to say that children must be allowed to participate in sports based on their perceived gender identity. So if you're allowed to participate in sports based on your perceived gender identity, a boy who thinks he's a girl, or at least claims he's a girl, is going to win the track meets, is going to win the wrestling competition, is going to win the boxing competitions. And so I have a few images of this up here. These slides are a year old, sad to say. There are many new instances of this. And what does this mean? It means the end of women in sports. Correct. This is not rocket science. It means the end of girls' participation in sports, which shows you that this is not about the kids in sports. It's about power. It was about power when they were shutting down the boys' wrestling programs. It's about power today. For the true ideologue, I don't care whether you're a Marxist or a sexual revolutionary, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. So the fact that you contradict today what you said yesterday doesn't matter. That's not the point. This is a case in point of direct self-contradiction of the stated aims, but they're rolling along like nothing's wrong because the stated aims aren't the real aims. So that's the thing that I want you to see about this. And as I said yesterday, as we all kind of scratched our heads over this yesterday, but concluded it doesn't matter that they're contradicting themselves because that being intellectually coherent is not what they're about. They're about accumulating power. Okay, so how do these visions of the gender ideology fit together? In both cases, what they have in common is that the human body is unimportant. The sex of the body is unimportant, and we can transcend the sex of the body, either by social reconstruction and social engineering, which is what the first round of feminists did, or through individual reconstruction using a lot of law and technology to back it up. Okay? But the sex of the body is basically not very important. It's a kind of mind-body dualism. It's a part of Gnosticism, which says that the body is evil and the spirit is somehow superior or better or more real in some way. One time I heard a guy giving a talk on this matter, and at this very point he said, "Quick, give me a Dominican!" Right? Because it's the same thing that St. Thomas was dealing with, right? The same thing that St. Augustine was dealing with. They were called Manichaeans then. You know, it's the same Gnostic heresy in new transgender clothes. Okay, so a couple of things for you to be aware of about transgenderism is the extent to which people are insufficiently screened before they put them into these programs of either chemical or surgical reconstruction or social reconstruction. This is a guy whose website you need to be aware of. If this is an issue that comes up in your life, the first guy you want to type into your browser is Walt Heyer. And he talks about, he calls his website Sex Change Regret. And he talks about transgender reversal. The number of people who have desisted from being the opposite gender and have gone back to their original birth gender. The thing that he reports about his own case is that as a little boy, he was sexually abused by an uncle, and he was also psychologically abused by his grandmother, who preferred him to be a little girl and who dressed him in girl's clothes when he was about 3 or 4, okay? And wanting to please his grandma and having no one to protect him and so on and so forth, he fell into this line of thought. Well, nobody inquired about that when he went in to have life-changing self-mutilating surgery. Nobody inquired about any of that. And there are many cases that have been reported about this, where there's an underlying psychological, sometimes a personality disorder, sometimes a kind of dissociation disorder, though those things are not being identified or even screened for before they put people on this protocol of changing genders. So you need to be aware of that. There's some other sites out there as well, but this is an important first step in understanding that. Okay, so let's move on now to talk about some of these contested questions. And the first one, and the main one I'm going to spend some time on, is, are people really born gay? Is born gay a real thing? We all think it is. We've heard it endlessly. So I'm going to start with something that happened about a year ago. And it might, I don't know how you're going to feel about this headline, but I'm going to put it up there anyway, and we'll just deal with it. Okay. These headlines from about a year ago, Pope Francis said, the headline reads, Chilean abuse victim. Pope told me to accept being gay. God made me this way. LGBT activists praise Pope Francis's remarks that God made you gay. All right, so these headlines blasted around the world. A lot of people looked at this and thought, oh my golly, what is going on now? So let's begin by saying, at the time these headlines came out, we didn't know, and we still, I think to this day, don't really know exactly what Pope Francis said in that interview. We don't really know what he meant. We don't know what the abuse victim, Juan Carlos Cruz, we don't know what he heard because he's the one who reported this to the press, so maybe Pope Francis said one thing and Juan Carlos interpreted it in a different manner and said something different. So this is an image of the young man. What I want to focus on is not so much the journalistic issue here, but on the implied scientific claim. There is an implicit in those headlines was an implied scientific claim that you were born that way, all right? Not explicit, but implicit, a claim that people were born that way. So the first thing I want to just point out, this is basic Catholic catechetics. The Pope is infallible. When is the Pope infallible? When he predicts who's going to win the World Series? No. When he makes scientific claims? No. He is not infallible. So even if he said it, we don't need to be freaked out. You know what I mean? We don't need to think, oh gosh, our faith is being undermined because our infallible leader is no longer infallible. No, we never claimed, Vatican I never claimed he was infallible in those kind of studies. So we have to have that clear in our minds. First of all, he could say, he could make a, there are a lot of things the Pope could say where he'd be mistaken. The only claim, it's a very specific thing, that the charism of infallibility is when the Pope speaks ex cathedra on a matter of faith and morals. That is very, very well and carefully defined context of papal infallibility. So what I want to show in these next few slides is that this implied claim that people are born that way is not scientifically sound. Okay, and I hope you don't think I'm bashing the Pope for saying this. I mean, I'm just saying a lot of people think that people are born that way, and that's not true. So you don't have to believe that, all right? So first off, where did this claim come from? So I believe that the claim that people are born that way was part of the legal campaign to redefine marriage. And the reason that is so important to that process is that the LGBT activists correctly presumed that if they could show that being gay, that gay was somehow like race, that it was an immutable, inherent characteristic, then the whole interior machinery of the anti-discrimination law could be imported wholesale into the area of pro-LGBT advocacy. I'm quite certain that was the strategy, that was the mentality, okay? And so if you could prove that it was like race in some significant way, then that would help that cause, all right? So this is an image of Judge Ron Walker, who overturned the Proposition 8 in California, and you probably found out that that guy was himself gay. The judge was gay. He didn't recuse himself. He had no conflict of interest. No. Okay, so is it true that people are born that way? And what else could born that way mean or be or do? Well, you know, born that way could be a pickup line. You know, isn't it useful? What if Juan Carlos hear from his predator? What are kids today hearing from their predator? God made you that way. It's okay. God made you that way. Right? Is that creepy? Is that creepy or what? It is, and I do believe people are using that way. So it's quite possible that Juan Carlos Cruz, this particular guy, needed to hear from Pope Francis that this was okay, and that's how he interpreted what Pope Francis actually said. We don't have any way of knowing that. But I want you to see the usefulness, the potential usefulness of born that way as a pickup line for a predator. Okay, I want you to see that, because I think people are being victimized by that use of it. The next contested question is, what does the term gay even scientifically mean? Okay, what does it mean? So scientifically, the term gay could mean, are you attracted to people of the same sex? It could mean, have you ever had sex with a person of the same sex? Do you identify yourself as gay or lesbian? So it could be feelings, actions, or self-identification, or some combination of those three things. And so here we are getting into these super nerdy weeds here. But I think it's very important to understand that the term gay doesn't have a precise scientific meaning. I'm going to show you a slide from a classic study from 1994. This is a study that was done by the University of Chicago, some demographers over there, the University of Chicago, trying to understand how many people are gay. And they were responding to Alfred Kinsey's thing, where Alfred Kinsey claimed 10% of the population is gay. Now I want you to know that Kinsey's estimate of 10% of the population being gay, have you ever heard that number? 10% of the population is gay? Okay. That number has never been replicated by any serious person in any country, anywhere. Kinsey made it up. That's the most simple explanation. That is a made-up number. Do not accept it from anyone. Okay, so these guys, back to these guys at the University of Chicago. They asked this question, are you attracted to people of the same sex? They get a certain answer. Men, 6% of men, 4% of women say, yes, I'm attracted to persons of the same sex. Have you ever had sex with a person of the same sex since puberty? Even a single time, have you ever done that? 9% of men say yes, 4% of women say yes. Do you identify, do you self-identify as gay or lesbian? In this study, 2.8% of men and 1.4% of women self-identify as gay or lesbian, okay? Now the interesting thing, and the reason I put this little thing up here, is that if you ask yourself, how often do those things overlap? That's what this little thing is here. See the little dark area up here? To have all three of those things, yes, I have these desires, yes, I've done it, yes, I self-identify, it's a much smaller set of people who claim all three of those things. So do you see the problem? If you want to inflate the number of gays, you say, have you ever done it? You're gay. Okay? Do you feel it now? How strongly do you feel it? There's all kinds of gradations of what this term even means. And do you self-identify? Obviously, that's a decision to self-identify. That's in a different category altogether than something that you're born with. Okay, so that's the reason I put that up there for you is for you to see just the ambiguity about what if you say people are born gay, what are you even saying? They're born with the desire, they're born with the acts. No, they can't be born having performed the acts. You know, it's ambiguous what the term itself even means. Now, gay could also mean this question: have you had sex exclusively with same-sex sex partners since puberty? That is obviously a much smaller number. Less than 1% have had sex exclusively with a same-sex partner since puberty. Okay, much smaller set of people. And here's the reference. When I put them out there in bright red, that's my signal to you that that's a slide with just references. More recently, there is a woman named Dr. Lisa Diamond who has studied sexual identity and sexual orientation extensively. She herself identifies as lesbian. And she says this: there is currently no scientific or popular consensus on the exact constellation of experiences that definitively qualify an individual as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So this is one of the leaders in the field saying, we don't know. We do not have a definition. Now, parenthetically, if you are in the law and you're trying to say gay is a protected class, who is that? Who's in the class? How do you define who is in the class? In my opinion, the legal team that defended marriage did us a disservice by not going more hard on this question. Are people really born that way? Is it really an immutable trait? And what the heck are we even talking about before we start doing all this anti-discrimination law? Do we even know what the boundaries of this category are? If you can define yourself into the category and thereby get yourself civil rights protections, that's a little different from being black. Right? And by the way, a lot of black people really resent this. They really resent the wholesale importation of anti-discrimination law into this area. A lot of black people are Christians. Did you guys know that? Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad you all know that, okay, because you would never know that if you watch CNN or something. Okay. So gay could also mean an individual might also have this kind of relationship to the word gay. Person might mean that I'm same-sex attracted and living a chaste life. There are people who use the term that way. I'm a gay Christian. I'm living a chaste life, but I'm same-sex attracted. Some people will say they're trying it as a lifestyle. This used to be, probably still is, a thing among college students. I'm a lesbian until graduation. You ever heard that? It's called slugs. Smith, it started at Smith College. Smith lesbians until graduation, okay? So obviously not born that way. That's what they mean when they use the term. They might mean they lived that way for a time, and now I'm married to a person of the opposite sex, an ex-gay person. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways people might be using the term. And so today's call to action number 2, watch your language. Watch your language. Do not, I strongly urge you, do not use this term gay. Use a big, long, clunky phrase if you need to, but at least you will be clear about who you're talking to and what you mean to say. So you can use the term same-sex attracted in some cases. You can use the term homosexually inclined. You can use the term men who have sex with men. By the way, that's the medical term. You ever see medical research being done? They will always use this acronym MSM, meaning men who have sex with men. Why? Because they want to know, how are the microbes spreading? How is disease progressing? What is the physical health status of people who perform certain acts? They're not interested in your fantasy life. They want to know, did you do the deed and how often? Right? So their word is men who have sex with men. That is much more descriptive of what they're concerned about. And so I would commend that to all of you. And as I mentioned last night, somebody says to you, I'm gay. You have every right to say and ask, not in a belligerent way, but just in an inquiring way, what do you mean by that? Tell me what you mean. Tell me more about what you mean when you say that you're gay. All right, so we're now 30 minutes into this presentation, and I'm going to stop right here with the slides that I have. I've got 2 other questions that are in these slides. If you want to, I can, if we have time, we could go back to this during the Q&A. But I have slides in here on what causes some people to experience same-sex attraction, what are the causes of same-sex attraction, and what's the evidence on people changing their patterns of behavior and attraction. So I'm stopping here. The reason being, this is in the slides from last summer and on the Ruth Institute podcast series, and now I'm going to go do something else. But it's all here for you if you want it. All right. Gender ideology and the clergy sex abuse and cover-up crisis in the Catholic Church. That's what we're going to talk about for a little bit. Because everyone's concerned about this. This is something obviously a lot of people are concerned about. And particularly, people are concerned about the question of sexual orientation and the clergy sex abuse scandals. What is the role of sexual orientation in the clergy sex abuse scandals? Now, the Ruth Institute, my organization, produced a study on this subject and we released it last November. And the person who did this study, I want to tell you a bit about him. This is Father Paul Sullins. Father Paul Sullins is now a senior research associate at the Ruth Institute. He is a retired sociology professor from Catholic University of America. So he's Father Paul Sullins, PhD. He prefers to be called Father rather than Doctor. Okay, so because that's his highest honor or his highest office, to be Father. So he's Father Sullins, PhD. He also happens to be a married Catholic priest because he was once Episcopalian. And he and his family came into the Catholic Church some years ago. And then he got a PhD at CUA, and he has taught sociology. So I engaged him at the Ruth Institute in April of 2018 because he has done some very serious work on the impact of same-sex parenting on children. And when we connected with each other, I had read his stuff, I knew his material and so on. When I found out that he was footloose, we were chatting it up, and our thought was that he would continue to do this work, that we would support him in continuing to research this very important question of what is the impact of same-sex parenting on children. He's got data, and he's one of these guys who goes after the data, and he knows where it is, and that's what you learn when you're a sociologist. You love that stuff, right? So that was our idea when I engaged him. Fast forward a few months, he's working away on it, working on some stuff on psychological impact of abortion and responding to some terrible study that pro-choice people put out, and so on and so forth. This is what pro-life sociologists do, right? just deal with the bad stuff, right? Generate some good stuff. So, we're minding our own business, in other words. And then the Pennsylvania grand jury report comes out. And then the carrot scandal comes out. And I'm seeing people online chatting about this. And I'm thinking they don't know what they're talking about now when I looked at the Pennsylvania grand jury report. Because everybody wanted to say, not that one, the John Jay report, the John Jay College report, everyone wanted to say, yes, there's a disproportionate number of incidents of abuse against boys, but it has nothing to do with homosexuality. The John Jay report proved definitively it has nothing to do with homosexuality. And I'm like, it doesn't sound right. How do you even square that circle? So I called Paul, Father Sullins, and I said, Father Sullins, are you familiar with the John Jay report? He says, are you kidding me? Of course I'm familiar with the John Jay report. I mean, he's sociology, of course he knows. Of course he knows everything about it, right? So we started going back and forth a bit about it and realized that, that thing that's out there is not quite correct, right? It's like not even close to being correct. And he said, what we could do? We could take that grand jury report and we could turn it into data. I said, what do you mean? Well, you could read it, it's like 800 pages or whatever it is. It's got all these cases in it. You could read the cases and codify them. In other words, turn each case into a data point where you record the age of the victim and the gender of the victim and when it happened and different stuff like that. We could totally do that. And I'm like, wow, what would it take to do that? And he told me, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So he engaged somebody and we did it, and we created a data set. The Ruth Institute created a data set out of the Pennsylvania grand jury report. And he then used that together with other published research to do this report on the role of sexual orientation in the clergy sexual abuse scandal. The John Jay College, the people at John Jay College very graciously released some of their data for them to use. So we have that, plus let's see, I have it over here. We have that, plus the Pennsylvania grand jury report that we codified ourselves. And then it turns out, some of you are probably familiar with this because you've been involved in it, that as part of the Dallas Charter, every Catholic diocese is required to present a report on sexual abuse claims or incidents or charges and so on. Every year, every diocese is supposed to produce a report. So Father Paul went and looked at those reports and extended the data out beyond what was in the original John Jay report using that. So that's what this first study is based on. That's where we got our data on incidents, the incidents of abuse, okay? And as I mentioned, the Ruth Institute, did I say this already? Yeah, the Ruth Institute, we produced this and released it last November, and it created quite a bit of stir. You may have seen it in the National Catholic Register and other publications. The Catholic News Agency had it, and we then had it translated into Spanish and Polish, because those were places where people seemed to be particularly interested in this. So, we're going into super nerd territory here. Just mentioned the nerd bird has arrived, definitely. Okay, now, the other piece of data that Father Sullins used, that no one, to our knowledge, has used for this purpose, is a survey on the sexual orientation of priests. This is a survey that was conducted by the Los Angeles Times in 2002, and they surveyed over 1,800 priests. And they asked them the questions, which I have on the screen. They asked basically for a self-description. Would you describe yourself as mostly homosexual, mostly heterosexual? Gave them a 5-point scale to describe themselves in that way. Also, they asked, was there a homosexual subculture in your seminary when you were in seminary? And then they also asked the guys their age and their date of ordination and a few things like that. So that's the data that we have used. And I want to just pause here and say that data from 2002 has been laying around since 2002, and no one has ever used it for this purpose before. People have used it for other things, but no one has ever used it for this purpose before. So I'm kind of proud of Father Sullins, what he said. I think that's great what he did. So anyway, this was the killer table, the killer figure from that first report in November of 2018. And this was the finding that was discussed the most frequently. This is the thing everybody wanted to talk about, the very high correlation between the priests who report a homosexual orientation and the incidence of abuse. The very high correlation. This is a 90% correlation between those reporting a homosexual orientation and the incidence of abuse. Now I want, just pause. Do you notice? I did not say gay priests. At no time did I say gay priests. I don't use that. Men who report a homosexual orientation, that's the fact that we have, right? Because that's a fact. They do report it. They do say, I consider myself mostly gay, right? So that's our data point, and we don't have to get into the whole contested question of whether they were born that way or anything else, right? We're just going on their self-identification. So the most discussed finding is this correlation between the percentage of priests claiming a homosexual orientation and all incidents of abuse, about 90% correlation. Father Paul did a regression, regressing the percentage of priests claiming a homosexual orientation and the percentage of male victims, and I don't have the number up there. I think that was 94% correlation between the percentage of male victims and the percent homosexual. And then the correlation of priests saying that there was a homosexual subculture in their seminary and abuse, 96%. 96%. So these, to me, these are significant correlations. It is not possible to credibly say that same-sex attraction or homosexual orientation or homosexual activity has nothing to do with it. It's not credible to say that anymore, okay? And we'll perhaps talk about why this is even a question. You know, what's the mentality there? You know, kind of unpack that a little bit. So this is the thing that people wanted to talk about the most. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a data point of where they went to seminary?
Oh, isn't that a good question? Oh, isn't that a good question? Is there a data point on where they went to seminary? Wouldn't you just love to know whether there are certain seminaries that are problematic? You know, everybody would love to know that. And the answer is no, we don't know. We don't have that information. So, and I don't think the John Jay College even collected that information to where they went to school. There would be some ways of getting at that data, but it would be hard. It would be hard. It would require some legwork, but it could be done.
One other question on study, then I'll go back and read it if you want me to, but is the LA Times one, were they identified or just a unsourced 108 or 1,800 police?
What do you mean?
Was there ever an identity to who the priest
Oh,
was?
no. You would never identify the people who participated in the survey, right? But what Father Paul did was to do some analysis of it to see if it's reliable, you know. In other words, to say, okay, were these 1,800 guys somehow special? You know, were they representative? That's what you really want to know. Are those 1,800 guys representative? And as best we can tell, yes, okay? But one of the things that we recommend, that we strongly recommend, is that somebody do this survey again, right? That somebody do a more thorough asking of these questions to get to the bottom of this matter. So anyway, this is the thing everyone wanted to talk about. This was the most discussed part of our first clergy sex abuse report. To my mind, though, there was another even more troubling piece of data that came out, and that was this chart here, that clergy sexual abuse has been rising since 2002. I want you to take a look at that bar graph there, okay? That what we have here is, these are incidents reported since 2010. These are the incidents reported during different periods of time, okay? And what you can see is that we had a peak in the 90s, and there's even a bigger peak in the 80s. And it drops. This is around the Dallas Charter, of course, was in 2002. It drops, and now it's creeping back up, okay? And so that suggests that we didn't really solve the whole problem, right? That there's still something that we need to be dealing with, and that we're getting complacent, and we have no business being complacent, okay? And so I wanted people to talk about that, and people didn't seem to want to talk about that, but I put that out there for you all to be aware. We have not completely gotten to the bottom of this, even recently. Yes, ma'am.
The language that I hear is that since the clergy abuse, the language is that because we've implemented programs such as
Virtues and all that.
that it has actually, that it had declined. So this is really, this
It,
is,
it's-
this is
it
completely.
has not, no, to be fair, it has not gone up to its previous level, that's for sure. We're nowhere near the pre-Dallas levels, but it's creeping up. That's the way I would put it. I wouldn't say it's out of control or that those protocols have had no impact at all. I wouldn't say that. They have had some impact, and that's a good thing on it. But it's not solving the whole thing, right? And this, I wanted people to talk about this part of it, and everybody was wrapped up in the gay part of it. You know what I mean? So this kind of got lost in the shuffle. Yes, ma'am.
Are those reports since 2000, like incidents that have happened since 2000, or do they go back in time?
So these are by the date of abuse. So in other words, and Father Paul spent a lot of time on that, especially in his first piece, because there's typically a long reporting lag between when the thing happened, and the average reporting is 20 years later, 28 years later. Okay, so the date of report is not what you're interested in. It's the date of the incident that you're interested in. So, therefore, these are by date that the incident took place. That's what this is trying to do. Never mind when it was reported. I mean, for this purpose, that's not what we're interested in. Okay, so you see. So he thought of that. You know, in other words, he thought of that and kind of tried to go back and say, well, let's compare apples to apples. What was reported? Let's just look at the incidents that actually occurred that we know about now in these different time periods, and what can we analyze about that? What can we know about that? All right.
Those are self-reporting, right? That's self-reporting from the diocesan level.
These, let me see.
Or are they law enforcement reports?
Hold on. This particular thing is what comes from the CARA reports that each diocese reports.
So it's self-reporting from
the dioceses. So what do you conclude from that, Chuck?
Well, I mean, there could be a higher awareness on the diocesan level, and our bishops possibly, if we want to throw them a bone, maybe they're more attuned to this, and they're saying we're gonna put this into our database.
They may be reporting things that wouldn't have been reported in the
Thank you.
past.
That's what I wrote.
That's possible. It's also possible that they're under-reporting, that they're hiding stuff. You can't really know that.
We know the culture is getting worse, so
What?
we know the culture is getting worse.
Which culture? Around us?
Our culture.
Oh, yeah.
So our priests are not immune from our culture. So,
Right.
but this is interesting to me.
That's right. And you know what? What we try to do at the RIF is that we try to put it out as clearly as we can and then let people draw their own conclusions.
Yeah.
So before I go on, I'm about to tell you about another study. Before I leave this study, I want to mention that we put this, we announced this in November, early November last year. We did some media about it. We created a website with it, and we housed our data there so that anyone who wants to analyze our data that we have responsibility for, anyone can do that if they want to. We don't control the John Jay data. You know, we don't have the authority to give people that data. But the data that we have, basically it's out there. So anyone who wants to do their own analysis of the data is welcome to do it. I want you to know that we have not had any serious intellectual pushback from the numbers themselves and from our analysis of them. We have not had anybody stand up and say, Dr. Sullins, you're a nut. Dr. Morse, you've lost it. You're just anti-gay bigots and you're making stuff up. We have not had, and we have people try to say that, but not a single person who has looked at the data and said, you made this mistake or that mistake or it was miscoded or whatever. But we're ready for people to do that. That's why we put the data out there. That's what you're supposed to do, right? You put your data out there, let people deal with it. So let's go on to the next report, which we're going to release. Sure.
How do you define sexual abuse?
How do you define sexual abuse? We don't. We take what has been self-reported as sexual abuse. And I think that is also an important question because the definition of harassment, if you include harassment in the definition of sexual abuse, you've got a much broader category than if you have touching or penetration or rape or those kind of things. By the way, this is all of our data, all of it is about minors. There's nothing in here about seminarians or women who come for confession or anything like that. There's nothing, this is all about minors. That's all we have data on. You know, because that law enforcement's involved and all of those other issues, right? So that's what we know. So we're going to go with what we know, and you know, and try to build from there. We start with a foundation of what we know for sure. I mean, we can be pretty sure that there's a problem with abuse and harassment of adults. We know that that's a problem, but we don't have anything systematic about it. And anybody who says they have something systematic about it is blowing smoke. Okay? I mean, I'm just going to say, because if it was out there, we would have had it, right? You know, we would have found. They should say it. If they have something systematic, they should say it so everyone can see it, right? Okay, so this week we're going to release Clergy Sex Abuse 2. Father Solomon has a new study, and we'll have an online press conference on Thursday. If you know anybody in media, Catholic media, your local media, anything, that would like to be part of that online press conference, they can come and do so. Father Solomon will be on the line answering questions. He'll give a short presentation and then he'll answer questions about it. Now, what we've done here is try to get a better sense of what has happened since 2002. The new data which we have is from an independent journalist who's been gathering incidents over the years from public sources, from court documents and things like that. And he's got over 6,500 incidents. And Father Solomon did a whole bunch of analysis to make sure his data is more or less congruent with the earlier data, so that I think the definitions are being used similarly and so on. Okay, so the major finding, number one, from this study, guys, getting preview, okay, because you showed up and tell all your friends who didn't show up, who did these other things, they're going on the diocese today, that you missed the preview, okay, this big rollout of this study. Major finding number one, the percentage of male victims has fallen dramatically. The percentage of male victims has fallen dramatically. So you gotta get this in your mind. The first thing that we talked about, there is an increase in sexual abuse, but it's less concentrated among boys now. The average victim now is less likely to be male, and it is more likely to be a little bit older. So the victims are more girls and more a little bit older victims. That's what's happened since 2002. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It's just a fact. Okay. So that's what this graph is showing, that the percentage of male victims peaked in the 1980s. See this thing here peaked in the 1980s, early 90s, and then the male victims are falling off. What you can also see is a steady substrata of female victims. It's not changed very much. But you will, let me say for the record, we care about the girl victims also. We care about all the victims. Right? Yes, we care about all the victims, right? Okay, so this is the first major finding. Very interesting to me. Second one is that the newly ordained priests are different. And this is a little bit related to your question, but it's not about the seminaries. It's more about age of ordination. One of the things Father Solomon discovered as he wrote down the incidents of abuse is that the abusers were concentrated in two different age groups. Not so much age group, but date of ordination. Guys ordained in the 60s, guys ordained in the 80s. Those two groups are responsible for a disproportionate amount of the sexual abuse. Those two it's like waves of guys. And so this particular slide here, what he did is he broke it down to men ordained less than 10 years. That's the definition of a recently ordained priest. Okay? And men who've been ordained 30 years or more. All right? So if you look at this, these are 20-year segments, I guess you'd say. In that early segment, the recently ordained priests accounted for almost half of the incidents of abuse. As you go, but today, the recently ordained priests, that is, if you look at the incidents of abuse since 2000, in the roughly 18 years since 2000, of the abuse that has taken place, men who were ordained in the last 10 years, from that period of time, only about 10% who have been ordained 30 years or more, today, as of today, they are responsible for half the cases that have been reported since.
When they be the same priest?
Do what?
When be the same priest?
Yeah.
No. So a priest today, okay, so today, you look around the diocese, you got young guys who are ordained in the last 10 years, and then you got guys in their 70s, okay, who were ordained 30 years ago or more, okay? Different group of people. So I'm not sure quite what you're see, but today's abusers, you're more likely to see a 70-year-old hitting on a teenage boy. That's what we're seeing today. That was that case
What
inside.
I'm saying is a priest that was in the 19, whatever.
80s to 90s.
She's saying it's the
Yeah.
same population.
Absolutely, yes,
It would
it's
be
the same people.
that would be in the.
These guys here, these
Now.
guys here are approximately these guys over here.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, you are correct. And he's got the chart. When you see the paper, if you like this kind of thing, you see my tables, it really makes my heart beat fast looking at it, right? But you can follow it through. You can follow those guys through, and there are kind of two big batches of guys who are causing a lot of problems. You know, and that's what you see. Okay. So
So
this
that also
is
means the bishops haven't gotten rid of those guys at all.
do it.
Bishops haven't gotten rid of those guys at all.
Oh no, we know that.
They're letting them stay out there. Yeah.
Ma'am, perish the thought that I should say anything negative about a bishop at this time. At this time. Anyway, right here, we want to get our facts straight. Have you ever seen these facts before?
No.
Do you think these are relevant facts?
Yes.
Yes, they are definitely relevant. Right, these are definitely relevant. Now, these fellows who were ordained 30 years ago, today, they're at the top of the people. You know, they're the institutions of the church. They're the ones in the positions of responsibility and so on, right? So that's part of what we're dealing with. Now, Father Sullins is all, you know, these guys are aging out. They're not, oh, that's good. Maybe that's a good thing, you know? Some of the problems solve, some of it won't completely solve itself. Okay? You still have to do particular things to address what's going on. I want to show you this other chart. This is a chart showing percentage of abuse by recently ordained priests by the sex of the victim. Okay? And by the way, these are the slides you're going to get in your inbox in a couple days. Okay? So you're going to have all this, you can scribble on it and have it and everything like that. Okay, so of the men, if you look at the incidents of abuse done by guys who were ordained in the last 10 years, whatever year that is, that's what these bars mean, okay? So the fellows who were ordained within the last 10 years in the 60s and 70s, their victims were, half of the victims were male at that point, of the recently ordained priests. Now you come over here to today. Of the men who have been ordained in the last 10 years, there have been 0 male victims. 0 male victims have been reported by priests who were ordained in the last 10 years, which suggests that we're doing something right somewhere in our choice of candidates for ordination and in their formation. Something's going right somewhere. So we want to hone in on what's going right so that we can boost that, you know, and obviously this is an important piece of information. We do have, though, the troubling fact of abuse of girls, right? That of the people being abused, that 25% of them are girls. So we're running out of our official time, but I want to close with just a few more kind of calls to action, things for you to think about to do. Remember, watch your language. This term gay is very loaded term. Okay, it is a very loaded term. Because, think of this. If you use the term gay the way it's often used in the culture, you could be saying that the teenage victim who's not sure who he is, and somebody says to him, "You were born that way." You don't want to use the same word for him that you use for the 70-year-old priest who has a lifetime of sexual predation of boys. You don't want to use the same term. And I think that this is a place, in a way, where the strategy of the homosexual activists is kind of backfiring on them. And if you notice, they're very quiet. we're getting to say a lot more things about sexual orientation now than we used to be able to, right? It used to be if you said, we challenge the born gay concept, people would be jumping on you like you're, morally suspect and so on. You can say that now. You can say, I don't believe people are born gay. You can actually get away with saying that in public. Trust me. I used to have handlers, guys who were reading all my stuff to catch me if I said something bad so that they could post me on the hate map. You guys know I'm a hate group, right? Okay. All right, just so you know what manner of person you're dealing with. I think my battery has died, is what I think. Seriously. Yeah, I got a red light here.
Don't take any offense.
You know what? No, I think it's the Southern Poverty Law Center has aborted my the recording.
I've got it.
You want me to?
If you just unput it there, then
All right.
I've got another one.
Beautiful.
Got it back on.
The plot thickens. So, but you see now what they're kind of, they have been, how do I put this? We've been using one term to cover all of these different kinds of people who have ever experienced same-sex attraction or who have ever done certain things. We're using that one term to describe all these different people. And they really aren't the same kind of people. And so sometimes people will say, how dare you say gay people are sex abusers? To which the response is, that's not what we're saying at all. In fact, we're not even using the word gay. Right? We're staying out of that. Okay? But they kind of know there's a problem. And they don't, it's better for them if that doesn't, there are certain people who benefit from obfuscation. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to put it that way. So this is an image of a book by Daniel Mattson called Why I Don't Call Myself Gay. I noticed it's back there. This is an outstanding book. If you have a young person in your life who's dealing with this issue, you need that book. It's a very good book. And here's the kind of rhetorical question I want to put to you. What do you call a guy who has participated in the same-sex sexual lifestyle, who has experienced same-sex attraction, who has a long-term problem with homosexual pornography, who has done many dark things when they were actively engaged in the homosexual lifestyle, and who has since left that lifestyle? Do you call him gay? Do you call him ex-gay? What do you call him? If he is living a life of chastity today, I call him a saint. I call him a saint. That's what we're all called to do. So watch your language, people. Okay, watch your language. And in another area, we want to be sure that we're distinguishing between acts and feelings. And I'm going to state this for the record. If you agree with it, you can use it too. But I think for already ordained priests, we should feel free to say the following. Father, if you are having sex with men, you need to leave the priesthood. If you are having sex with men, you need to leave the priesthood. Period. To the already ordained men. That has to be. We don't care about their feelings. We don't care about the chaste gay man who entered the priesthood getting over a period of same-sex attraction and activity, who got over it, who has been living a chaste, holy life for the past 30 years. We're not worried about that guy. I'm not worried about that guy. That's the saint. That's our guy, right? But if you're doing it, if you are having sex with men, you need to leave the priesthood. Now, if you're a vocation director, if you're a seminary director, if you're in charge of formation, those guys do care about the feelings. Because men with deep-seated same-sex attraction, some of them, they shouldn't be ordained. That needs to be resolved before they enter the priesthood, okay? We're not going to go back and kick people out. I don't know any serious person who is saying that we're going to go back and kick out guys who once experienced same-sex attraction, who've been living a chaste life for 30 years. I don't know any serious person who would say that. But going forward, this actually is the instruction of the church. This actually is the stated policy of the church, that men with deep-seated homosexual attractions should not be ordained to the priesthood. And there's a whole theology of that, which we're going to talk about, which Father Solomon talks about in his paper. And there's a whole, and many of the modern, younger generation of seminary directors and formation directors have embraced that theology, and they're ordaining John Paul, to what we call John Paul II priests, right? People who are attracted to the priesthood by that whole vision of John Paul II. Very different group of men, and they are being treated differently by their seminary directors and formators. So I'm going to just say that all of this information, this is the kind of stuff we talk about every day on our Facebook page, every week in our newsletter. And so if you want to keep up with this stuff, you need to sign up now. Okay, and I still have the sign-up sheet here if you haven't already signed up. And if you are already on the list but want these slides, you still might want to sign up. So, all right, that's all I've got for now. I don't know what Rusty's plan is for Q&A or how long we have, because I know we have other things coming up.
We do have a few minutes. We want to make sure they have a break. But I'd say we've got 5 minutes or so for QA if there are questions.
We've kind of taken a few questions already, which
Yeah,
is great.
yeah.
So, but
If you don't have a question that they haven't had a chance. Yeah.
A question on the data, some of it driven clearly by a wish to get this out. Others, what part of the data, if you know, is driven by things the insurance companies are requiring of their bishops? That is, say, if you want us to insure you, we need you to take these steps in order to reduce the number of incidents that we're having. Do you have any?
I have no earthly idea. The answer to that question, I have no earthly idea. Just to repeat the question for the sake of the tape, he wants to know, is some of the behaviors of the bishops with respect to both their policies and their reporting being generated by the demands of insurance providers? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. If I were an insurance company, I guess I'd be a little concerned about all this, huh? Now that you mention that, that's a...
Driving the question is that we've gone through, everybody here goes through Versus training, which
Yes.
is based on state-of-the-art research from 1985. But it
Give that
is-
man the microphone. This is hilarious. I can't do this justice. Okay, so what he said was, part of our insurance, our insurability requirement is that every volunteer, anybody who's anywhere near the church, has to go through Virtue's training, which is, that's all fine, but he made the sardonic remark that it's up to the date state-of-the-art training that was created in 1985. So, I personally have no direct information about Virtue's and its effectiveness. I've heard a number of things from a number of people, but I don't have anything to add. You guys probably are much more familiar with it than I am because you've gone through it.
It's about the same persuasiveness and effectiveness as Lamar's. Which is not useful until your children become teenagers.
All right. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe that's great.
Anything else? So, you may have seen this book that was out a while ago where somebody claimed that 80% of the Vatican was gay. Remember that book?
Yeah.
Okay, that book was garbage. Okay, that book was, on a number of levels, that book was garbage. And part of the reason it was garbage is because what people kind of wanted that book to do was to say, you can't run all the gays out of the priesthood because nobody will be left. I think that's where some of those guys were going. But that book was so bad, it was so misinformed on a number of levels. Those numbers were kind of being thrown around. It was clear that he was just interviewing people who were making stuff up, and that it might have applied in one little corner over here, it didn't apply generally. That even the people who would like to say there's no problem at all with homosexuality, they haven't been able to use that book as effectively as you might have thought because there were so many weaknesses in the book. So anyway, if you hear people, this is the most definitive work on this subject. And I'm not saying that to brag, I'm saying it because it's true, and if there was anything better, we would have heard about it by now. Right? Because somebody would have raised their hand and said, that's garbage, we've got better stuff. No, nobody. No, I wish somebody would. Say, we've got better stuff, we have more information. I wish there was better. But this, as far as I know, this is it. This is what we have to work with right now. Yes?
Well, you can look at all these numbers, but when you think of a predator, sexual predator, they draw the person to them and form a good relationship before this happens. And therefore, the person who is offended doesn't want to do harm to the person who did that to them. So there's so much that's not reported. So much that's not heard. So our concern is for the people,
Right.
the young ones who are being um, who are being violated. And this doesn't even begin to show it, I'm sure.
Right, right.
So,
And that's part of why there's such a lag between the reporting of the abuse
Yes,
and the actual
that's why
incident
there's
of
a
the
lag.
abuse. Let me say one, since I'm about to be drawn off the stage here, let me just close with this thought. I think that a lot of times within the church, we have a tendency to view the clergy sexual abuse scandal through the lens of, does this help my tribe within the church? Does this help my point, my little group? You know, does it help the Latin Mass people? Does it help the pro-gay people? Does it, you know, how can we kind of use this to go rah-rah for our team, whatever our team is? And I don't care what your team is. I think that's a wrong approach. I would like to suggest that we all start from the idea that we're concerned about the victims and truth. Truth for the church, our mother, the truth for the church, and truth and healing for the victims. Genuine concern for the victims, that comes first. You know, when we were working on our little campaign about Cardinal Mahoney, one of the things that came out was that there were a number of people in our group who had been victims of childhood sexual abuse, not necessarily all clergy sexual abuse, but childhood sexual abuse. And the thing that is becoming clear to me is how deeply harmful, how long-lasting the harm is. And so therefore, these people, you know, they were the ones who were telling us, you know, when we see a guy out and about like nothing happened, you know, and people are treating somebody as a respected member of the community, and really you know that he's done things he shouldn't have done, or he's covered for people and so on. It is triggering. It is literally triggering for the victim. And what I mean by triggering is not some snowflake thing, which we've come to, you know, we've come to kind of cheapen the term. But for a PTSD person, triggering is a real thing, right? Because they have these memories that are lodged in the body, and something comes up, and all of that is relived. Sometimes they can't breathe. Literally, they can't breathe. They might not be able to walk. Triggering is a real thing, and it is long-lasting. If you don't deal with it, it'll get worse. It won't get better. Just go on about itself. So we were trying to get people to see that part of the cost of you guys going out there like nothing's happening is that you're triggering all these people. You know, you're hurting them again. And we need to at least show some awareness of the fact that this is a thing, you know, that this is something that's really affecting people. So I think that it's important for us, if you start from the perspective of the victim, you won't go far wrong, right? You will start from the perspective of what needs to be done for truth and for healing for that person, to take that person seriously and help them. And that's why in our online forum and stuff like that, we have a place for people to tell, this is what happened to us. This is what happened to me. Yes?
Oh, sorry, I just have a question.
Okay, let her have the mic. Let her have the mic so it gets recorded.
Okay, so how many, are you tracking or have they tracked false accusations? Okay, so.
And no, I don't know anybody. Yeah, go ahead.
And, you know, is there a column for, because, you know, going back to Judge Brooks's comment, the insurance company, there are cases where dioceses have settled just to keep it out of the paper. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be helpful to track those because you need to see the human nature of this.
They're trying to deal with it by saying substantiated versus unsubstantiated.
Right.
Right. And that's important, you know, because false accusations are a thing. Okay,
Yes.
false accusations, you don't want to say that it never happened or
Exactly.
right. But the problem is from the perspective of the person who's been genuinely victimized. Every false accusation makes it harder for them to actually bring forward a claim and be taken seriously and so on. So it's very complicated. And that's why it's important that we say only what we know to be true, right? And we not make sweeping statements, you know, that we try as best we can to be careful with it. So just for exactly this reason, because false accusations are, especially in family court, you know, I mean, you know, daddy touched me is, you know, it's like the nuclear option in divorce cases. And I think everybody who's been anywhere near that system knows that that's true. And then a lot of them just simply flat out false accusation, no evidence, you know, and so on and so forth. But anyway, that's another whole can of worms. towards discerning all of that, but you'll never get anywhere if you cover it up to keep it out of the papers. So you're gonna never really know what happened,
Right.
if that's the approach. But the short answer is I don't know. I don't know what the percentage of false accusations are in this area. I don't know.
Well, I really hate to cut off our Q&A right now because they're such great questions.